So a hijack alert was activated on a flight from Cape Town to Pretoria today. We talked to Guy Lech, who is the editor of the SA Flyer magazine. Good evening to you, as always. Thank you very much for coming in. Do you recall this ever having happened in South Africa before?
Yes, Iman, it happens, well, not often, but it happens with a regular frequency. It was not much more than about a year ago that, if I recall, it happened to an SAA flight as well. Normally what happens is that it emits this code. It's actually 7500 on its transponder, which is a reply to the radar. And ATC says, whoa, you're squawking 75. Is everything okay? The phrase is ops normal. And normally the crew will say, oh, okay, sorry, no, ops is normal. And that's what should have happened in this case, and it should have been uneventful. So it's strange that it's led to this other event.
Okay, so there would have had to have been some level of two-way communication. A signal would have been sent, there would have been response requiring an answer. It should have been given to neutralize it, and it seems as if it didn't happen in this particular case. Given that that is the case, did the pilots err in the protocol?
I don't think so. It's possible that the pilots had finger trouble. We don't know that yet. I'm not sure that we'll ever know that. So the Civil Aviation Authority's Pindi Gwebu said as much just a little earlier, said that the pilots pressed the wrong button. It's possible, but unlikely. But what should have happened was that the air traffic controller, in the form of radar, says, confirm that your operations are all okay. The pilot would say, yes, okay, sorry, no problems, and everything would continue as normal. And indeed, when the aircraft landed on the ground, I mean, it was clear that no one had breached the famous bulletproof, as it were, cockpit door, that there was no problems with the passengers or anyone else. So quite why it took 2 or 3 hours to search the aircraft and all the passengers, I don't know.
So in your mind, this is an overreaction?
It certainly seems an overreaction compared to what's gone down in the past as well on these events. Normally, if the pilot says operations are normal, the air traffic controllers would accept that as being the fact. There's no reason for it to be otherwise, unless the pilot was saying that he was actually under duress. But that's a different story entirely.
Well, don't you think that might have been, officials saying, well, even though, there was no potential, because again, this must all be established, I suppose, as this investigation unfolds, that even though the pilot confirmed there was nothing wrong, the fact that we'd had a signal is, it's better for us to err on the side of caution. Let's check this out anyway. Is that possible?
I think that's fair enough. I think that certainly would be the case put up for the extensive reaction, the extensive searches of all of the aircraft and the passengers after the landing. But a hijacking is a hijacking. It normally requires other people. It wasn't as though there was somebody said there was a bomb on board, so they weren't looking for something like that. There was no suspect. There was no reason to believe that the aircraft had been hijacked. So my question is, why did they park it right at the end of the runway, isolate it for 2 or 3 hours, search all the passengers and crew, delay everyone? Was it just not a show of force? Was it perhaps not an exercise gone wrong?
All right, so you say that in a certain circumstance there would be the activation of a whole series of protocols. If this was a genuine hijack, I mean, talk us through what potentially would have unfolded, both from an inside the cockpit point of view and an on the ground point of view.
Okay, well, from an inside the cockpit point of view, there's only one real law that matters, and that is safeguard the aircraft and obviously the passengers. So you don't take any risk. You, as a rule, do what any hijacker requires the crew to do. In this case, there wasn't a hijacker. The aircraft landed normally, and thereafter it was instructed to go and park at the far eastern end of the runway and wait for the emergency response teams to arrive, which they did actually with commendable speed. In fact, they arrived, they were there basically as the aircraft touched down. And let me point out that the hijack alert went out for basically just 8 seconds, 10 minutes before it landed. So it was incredibly quick.
Wow. So at least we know that works.
Yeah,
there's no big duster we need to take out the vehicle's function.
And I think the point is that I suppose we can be happy that at least they responded fully and properly rather than in a half-baked response. There is probably that to be said for the level of response that we got.
All right, so the passengers, we heard from some of the passengers who were saying they were treated like criminals until they were ushered into the terminal building. And as you say, they were held for so long without being kept appraised of what was happening. So they were completely bewildered by the time they got off. Is this also standard practice? I mean, and these people presumably are traumatized.
Well, yes, but actually it's more complex than that, because they were on the ground, and although they're not supposed to be using their cell phones, of course everyone was on their cell phones. So they were getting all the Twitter feeds and all the Facebook feeds and all the social media pouring into the aircraft, but they weren't getting information from the crew, especially from the air hostesses, because the air hostesses didn't know what was going on. In fact, the pilots apparently didn't know what was going on. They didn't know why there was such a strong task force there to meet meet them at the runway. They didn't know what had happened. They didn't know that they'd squawked this emergency code. So they were completely bewildered, but all this misinformation about 2 people having been arrested, unruly passengers, and all this stuff was coming into the cabin and upsetting the passengers even further.
So there was a lot of room for this to have been handled much better than it was. Guys, always appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Some lessons to be learned from this incident. Guy Leach giving us some perspective on the hijack alert. More response and analysis throughout the night.